we talked about this classic imbalance of demand and supply. We talked about the political aspects of this, which have also are probably not going to go away, and the backlog that we have. That the backlog because chips weren't being produced during the pandemic, so we have to get better about that. So let's think then about, if we look at companies building resilience into their supply chain, let's think, what we should look at first. I think we should probably define some of the things that are going to be significant in 2022. One of them, without any doubt, is there's going to be a bonanza around the edge and IoT. We're seeing that already, and particularly around sustainability and managing your scope 3 emissions. So we're seeing people already investing heavily in that. And to me, that means, this shortage is going to go on, and people are going to have to think about how they're going to manage, other applications for energy efficiency, for example, managing air quality, CO2, water, power, their autonomous fleets. All of this stuff is going to need a lot more edge and a lot more chips. We're also seeing people investing really heavily in 5G too. And well, that's going to mean even more requirement for all of this. And we don't see any slowdown in mobility and remote working. So that IoT market, we've seen it a little bit, I'd say, choked by the lack of chips. So we think the growth market, might be, might impede the growth market by 10% to 15%. And we think that dilemma really isn't going to be resolved until mid-2023. I don't know, do you have a different viewpoint on that, Yasha? And if so, what would really help around this?
Yeah, so I think it's as George, as you mentioned, there's only the electronic component manufacturers who are going to get us out of the conundrum in terms of the sufficient amount of chips being manufactured, right? Because there is no other way around that. And if you look at our industry with around 10-12,000 different component brands, famously here in Sourceability, we say that out of the 10-12,000 component manufacturers, essentially around 80 of them own pretty much the 80% of the market. So the likes of Texas Instruments, the Intels, the Qualcomms, and et cetera, they outpace, the rest of the component manufacturers from the emerging markets, the Asia Pacifics and all that. So essentially, if they don't get their act together and increase capacity, and build electronic components, which obviously they are, in that respect, they are so dependent to the companies such as ASML's, Lam Research, Applied Material, Nippon Electron, because they're the ones that creating these couple of $1 billion a pop semiconductor etching machines, right? Nobody's coming out of the conundrum. However, at the same time, there has been increase in the amount of production, and in the next couple of years, we foresee again, market getting flooded because these capacities are being put on place, and we go again back to that cycle of boom and bust. But nevertheless, till then, if you are in working as a buyer for electronic components, or if you're in the supply chain, in the purchasing and procurement, whether operational or strategic, and you have to deliver components for your production line, in order to produce, what should you do? How you could reimagine, this process, right? And in Sourceability, we founded the company, precisely based on this, solving this issue, where we felt that in the last, many years or decades, the electronic component supply chain purchasing hasn't really changed beyond emailing, sending Excel spreadsheets, sending your inquiries to a bunch of people that and knowing is very important, because you have trust that you're going to be quoted quality components, because there is an element of always, fake components in the industry. This has always been an issue, especially in the last 2 decades. So you get your quotes, you upload them in your ERP system, and then you start with your purchasing. And most of the times, unfortunately, especially in Americas or Asia Pacific, people work with just-in-time delivery, as opposed to Europe, where they work based on forecast. So if you're in a purchasing and procurement, and that's still how you buy electronic components, I can imagine that you still have, a lot of trouble. And the obvious answer that we thought, could serve the industry, or could start solving these problems is, getting inspiration from the B2C world. Right? None of us, only go to shops, to brick and mortar, or only call and email and get quotes. We go to e-commerce websites, right? Many of them, starting from the famous households like Amazon's, but not only. And I think that is where the power of internet at the fingertip, available, being to every buyer and a strategic or operational buyer is very important. And I think there you could see that the industry has come a long way, in many countries, especially, for example, in China, there are many marketplace e-commerce websites, that have been leading the way, even in the last, decade or decade and a half, and here, in the Western Hemisphere, in Europe or Americas, a lot of good things have happened with household distributors putting together a good, decent e-commerce websites, but also pushing that into a marketplace where they enabled other distributors to also participate. And we pretty much, were one of the pioneers of that here, at least in the Western Hemisphere, with SourceEngine.com, with our marketplace e-commerce website. So essentially allowing the customers 24/7 being able to serve themselves, and if the price and availability is not there, to communicate to us the requirement through their list of components, on using our, tools such as BOM engine, or code engine, as we call it, the BOM tool, or by communicating us inquiries and having to be served round the clock. And I think, it is important that, and not only, just because of our website in general, any procurement department essentially comes out of just email, quotes, trusted parties, Excel spreadsheets, and going to that e-commerce marketplace. And there are decent, trustworthy, a lot of websites there, they can, serve themselves in order to ensure that they stay ahead, of this topic. The other, thing there is strategic procurement departments, because a lot of big companies, they're not just buying electronic components, they're trying to stay ahead of buying electronic components, and essentially for that to have market intelligence and analytics. Again, I see a lot of movements in the industry with some household names, that have already existed, where they offer an analytics opportunity where the customers are able to look at for the next 6, 12 month, 18 month, and stay ahead of the curve, and anticipate. Again, for that in Sourceability, we have a service under a brand called datalink.com, where we allow the users, to take a look at their supply chain health, as well as being able to see the market intelligence and analytics. So essentially, really, using the power of internet and all sorts of different, applications and services that are available from a multitude of different parties, in order to stay ahead of the curve, whether from the operational or from the strategic standpoint.